For centuries, modern philosophy operated behind a strict boundary. Thinkers like Kant argued that human cognition is isolated from the world as it actually is, leaving us trapped inside our own perceptions, while reality remains permanently obscured. Complex realism aims to dismantle this anthropocentric barrier. The objective is what we call the ecologization of metaphysics, stripping the human observer of its privileged status and placing it on equal footing with every other entity in the universe. Getting there requires clearing out entrenched theoretical structures. To do this, we rely on the speculative materialism of French philosopher Quentin Meillassoux as a primary demolition tool. Meillassoux isolates the exact structural flaw in modern thought. His diagnosis of the problem is precise and serves as the indispensable starting point for the complex realist project. But here is the tension we have to navigate. While we fully accept Meillassoux' diagnosis of the philosophical disease, we will ultimately reject his proposed cure. To understand why, we need to map the mechanics of his critique. We are going to follow his logic exactly as he lays it out, tracing it all the way to its theoretical endpoint. Once we see the absolute mediator he installs at the apex of his system, we can dismantle it and swap it out for a more robust framework. Liberating reality means we cannot allow any single force to dictate meaning. True philosophical freedom requires a complete diaspora of agency. Meillassoux identifies modern thought's bottleneck as correlationism, the premise we only access the world through a correlation between thought and being. The outside world is completely sealed off. This creates a human monopoly, reducing everything outside our perception to raw, mute material. This theoretical bottleneck scales into geopolitical realities. When a specific viewpoint dictates the terms of existence, it enforces a colonial logic across the planet. Complex realism fully agrees. This subjectivist loop is a trap that mutilates reason. This closed loop isn't the only trap. Meillassoux is equally critical of Deleuze and Guattari, rejecting their chaosmos and what he calls monopluralist philosophies. He refuses to elevate the human subject to an absolute rule, but he also refuses to elevate vitalist becoming or constant flux to that same absolute status. To break the correlationalist loop, he must deduce an entirely different mechanism to access the in itself. Meillassoux executes this by turning the correlationalist argument inside out, focusing on the correlation's arbitrary nature. He introduces the principle of factuality. The fact that human thought correlates with being is on its own a contingent fact. It didn't have to be this way, and it could change. If the correlation is unnecessary, he deduces the only absolute necessity is contingency itself. This means every determinate reality can be something else for no reason. There is no hidden necessity holding the world together. To guarantee this radical contingency, he introduces his ultimate mechanism, hyperchaos. Hyperchaos is a time so radically liberated from metaphysical necessity that it can create or destroy absolutely anything without any cause. Unlike normal physical laws which govern predictable outcomes, hyperchaos can instantly rewrite or obliterate those laws of physics without warning. He relies on pure mathematical formalization and transfinite set theory to map this uncontainable void, attempting to grasp the absolute through equations. The correlational circle is now completely destroyed, replaced by a highly unstable void where structures emerge, shift, and collapse arbitrarily. In this model, the physical stability we experience right now is not a permanent law, but merely a temporary manifest illusion permitted by hyperchaos. This achieves an entirely anti-anthropocentric universe. The absolute is completely indifferent to our existence. Meillassoux successfully destroys the human monopoly on meaning, but he fills the resulting vacuum with a mathematically defined cosmic volatility. And this is the exact pivot point where complex realism breaks away from his model. We have to look at the structural integrity of routing all contingency in the universe through a single supreme mediator. By placing hyperchaos at the apex, Meillassoux inadvertently creates an anti-demiurge, a new totalitarian dictator of reality. He swaps out the human subject, but maintains the exact same top-down power structure that organized the modern world. This is a backfiring correlationism. Instead of freeing reality, he installed a different absolute ruler. As philosopher Martin Hegland points out, Time and change cannot exist as abstract absolutes. They require spatial and material constraints to actually function. By insisting that contingency operates on an absolute cosmic scale, Meillassoux ends up suppressing the actual granular complexity of real-world interactions. Trading a human monopoly for a mathematical monopoly fails to achieve the ecologization of metaphysics. It just moves the bottleneck. To genuinely escape correlationism, we cannot rely on singular absolutes. We need a mechanism that distributes the power of contingency across reality itself. This is where complex realism makes its structural swap. We abandon the single point of hyperchaos and replace it with a diaspora of agency. Contingency is not mediated by a global chaotic void hovering above the universe. It is generated locally by the friction of actual existence. The generators of this reality are the specific objects, systems, and actor networks that are actively observing and interacting with their environments. These entities operate through a mechanic of complexity reduction. They select, filter, and process the chaos around them, drawing their own boundaries between inside and outside. These systems create localized contingent necessities. They carve out rules for their specific networks without needing a universal law. The power to shape reality is distributed across an ecology of actors, not hoarded by a single force. And from this, what emerges is a dense, asymmetrical network of distinct, overlapping systems, organically colliding and adapting. We trade the absolute cosmic volatility of a void for a wild, localized ecology of actual functioning systems. But rejecting hyperchaos does not mean we discard Meillassoux' foundational work. His initial critique is the intellectual sledgehammer that definitively breaks the correlationist monopoly. By rigorously demolishing the idea that human access is the prerequisite for existence, he clears the necessary ground. Only because that territory is clear, complex realism can move in, allowing objects, systems, and networks to freely construct their own meaning in the world.